Today we have an outstanding episode ahead for you. Please welcome Kruti Bharucha.
I think for me, I'm so proud of just being an Indian. 2020 was our breakout year. We didn't have budget cuts. We did not lay off anyone. Our program scaled incredibly. We were running, 400 schools. What DRK's due diligence process helped us do was actually to really clarify our model. So we said at the heart of what we do is improved student engagement. There's one thing that I always live by, which is, what if I get hit by a bus tomorrow?
With CEOs, a whisper becomes a scream.
I actually have to weigh my words more carefully than I thought I did. This is like a pressure cooker situation, and I cannot blow up because there are too many people dependent on me, including my son.
As a woman founder who is a mom, also a solo founder, it's damn hard. Hi, welcome to the Barbershop. Today we have an outstanding episode ahead for you. Someone I personally admire tremendously. She's a very close friend and is a founder of Peepul. And something that I love talking to her about is, her life choices that got her to starting something in the non-profit space, focus on education. Please welcome Kruti Bharucha. Welcome, Kruti, and it's such a privilege to be in the barbershop with you. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you, Shantanu. Lovely to be here. I finally got invited.
But tell me, how many sari choices did you go through before saying, hey, I love that you wear sari. I think it's the nature of the job. You have to work with government and so on. You're all in a sari a lot, at least what I see on LinkedIn and photos. So did Barbershop bring out the best sari?
No, I just love wearing saris. So I think from my first job, I just find it really elegant. I just really like the outfit. I feel like there's a lot of grace in the sari. And so it's not really a part of my job, but I've worn it for a while. And I think I always used to be that girl who wears saris. Right?
Yeah.
Always known as that person who wears saris and who wears nice saris. So for Barbershop, I thought about it. And I was like, okay, it's with you,
Yeah.
right? So it needs to be informal. I'm not going to wear my silk sari and come on the show.
No, for sure. Did having a mother who was a civil servant, senior IS officer, I'm sure she would be someone who kind of carried the sari beautifully as well. Did she role model for you in a world where it carried power?
Yeah, I think not so much the sari itself, but she was very similar. So, we moved to the US when I was about 4. So she, had a posting in New York. So from the time I was 4 till the time I was 12, I basically did primary school in Manhattan, right? And she was very distinctive in her manner because she was, she used to wear a sari. And it's unusual, no? A lot of people who move to the US, they immediately will, take out their pants and the trousers and everything else. And I think it was just who she was, right? And she felt very comfortable in her skin. So she was actually not part of the IAS. So both my parents have PhDs in economics. Right?
Okay.
So they are both economists. So she kind of went in laterally into the government. And she was a very senior woman professional in the government. And there were many other IAS officers who she was working with day in and day out, right? And so I think through her, I got a real understanding of what it means to actually work and embed deeply in government systems. But also in 91, she was very involved when liberalization was happening. She was very involved with the export-import policy. She was in the Ministry of Commerce. And so I also saw policy making up close and personal, right? So I think she was definitely someone who was, is incredibly sharp, incredibly capable, has high expectations, right? So there is a lot to live up to, and you've met her.
I met her recently, and I'm a big. I can imagine what kind of an impact she would have had on you growing up, and even as an adult.
Yeah, I think my dad and mom had very different styles, right? My mom is very driven, very high expectations oriented. My dad was a lot more calm, a little more go with the flow. And so it was a nice compliment, I guess, growing up. Right?
Yeah. But and you do not have any siblings?
No. But it's a lot of pressure, right? To actually, live up to that high bar.
It's very similar, not similar, but kind of I can relate to it a lot in the sense growing up in the US, having, parents who you look up to a lot because they're socially considered to be high achieving, but at home they're still your mom and dad, right? But when you see others interact with them in the family or in their friends circle, you can see that they're very well respected. So you feel like you need to live up to something, and then it comes out in the way you are at school with your friends. You always, I don't know whether it's inadequate is the right word, but you always feel like there's more to do and that there's a lot more to live up to. Otherwise, it may not be worthwhile.
I think it was just, I think as a child also, right? I probably put a lot of pressure on myself. I think I continue to. I think I'm my harshest critic, right? So, yeah, there were high expectations, but I don't think there was pressure. I think there was clarity in the fact that academics were incredibly important to succeed. So, my mother comes from a very educated background. Both my parents have done their PhDs. And so, always for me, education was core, right?
Like
It was so critical.
Economics is like your family business.
Family business, right?
So was that dinner table conversation?
So we never talked about it at home.
Okay.
Never. Okay. We never talked about economics at home because I think it's also that thing, right? Where you probably don't realize the value of what you have at home, right? And so the economics I was doing then, occasionally they would provide input. And then you're like, no, but you don't know what I'm doing because I'm actually doing something completely different in school, right? And of course, they've been through it. And then syllabus changes and all of that stuff. So you don't fully, so we didn't talk about it at home, except the exposure that I used to get from my mom working in the government and during liberalization. And just now I look back and I think of all her colleagues that I met who were all extremely influential during the liberalization, right? And you get to meet them up close and personal and you see them for the people that they are. And then you realize much later that they were very instrumental in the way that India liberalized.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool to look at it that way, right? Kind of interesting.
I completely agree. I think I was just thinking that people who are going to watch this are like, hey, a woman has come on the show and the first thing you start with is our clothes. And I must disclaim that I've publicly been a fan of your sarees, and given our friendship is so close and for a few years, it's something that comes up a lot. So guys, there's context to this. But tell me about...
Also, to be fair, I did ask you what I should wear on the
Yes,
show.
please let me.
So it's not your fault, right?
No, I think you're looking amazing. And I agree. I think it is something that is become rarer and rarer now in the professional setup. Like we have almost, I don't know whether you saw the office, half our office is women. And it's not a formal office. So you might want to discount it a little bit by saying the men are not wearing shirts and trousers or formal wear. But I think more people wear kurtas than women wear saris in our office.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think so.
But even in your office, no, Shantanu, I've met with a couple of your colleagues who are women, right? Both of them said, oh, I love the fact you're wearing a sari.
Yeah.
I wish I could wear one.
Correct.
Right? And it's just, I think everybody appreciates it or everybody wants to. And I think for me, I'm so proud of just being an Indian that I feel like it's a very Indian thing.
Yeah.
And so
is it comfortable?
Yeah, I am very comfortable. But I think a lot of people are not used to wearing it, so they're not comfortable.
In summers, especially if it gets hot. And
you wear cotton.
Yeah,
You wear cotton. Don't wear silk.
Yeah, I agree. But coming to people, and I want to kind of probe more on. I will talk about what kind of took you from London School of Economics to McKinsey to World Bank to you did a bunch of things before you started Peepul. Which year was this?
2017.
So it's been 6 years running.
I can't believe it. Has it been 6 years? Yeah.
Yeah, 2017 till now.
Wow.
Give or take a year. Right? 6 years.
I moved to the education sector in 2014.
Okay.
So that's why education sector it's been
a decade now.
Yeah, no, I mean it's crazy.
Yeah.
The way time has flown. Right.
And also I think COVID, those 3 years of COVID kind of is a haze, right? So those 3 years you can discount, but still.
No, but we grew. We 2020 was our breakout year. Right? Yeah. The way that we pivoted our programs and the way that we grew as an organization. I'm so proud of that because we did not, we didn't have budget cuts. We did not lay off anyone. Our programs scaled incredibly. We were running, I guess, 400 schools. Not running.
Take a step back and tell us what Peepul does. No, you're right. I would love to come on to this. But for someone listening in who probably does not know Peepul, what was it in 2017 that you wanted to do? And then how has that built out over the last 6 years, including the stuff that you kind of were talking about?
should I go way back to why I entered the sector?
Yes, absolutely. We can go back to 2014 if you want. It's your show.
Okay. So let me start there, right? Because I think it's very important for somebody who works potentially in the social impact space, given how challenging the sector is and given how critical the problems are, you really have to bring everything to the sector, right? Or to the work that you do. So in 2009, my son Siddharth was born, like you met Sidhu. And 2009, he was actually born about 6 weeks premature, right? So I had just moved back from the US in 2009.
Was it Delhi?
Delhi, in Gurgaon.
Okay.
So had just moved back to India, was working at Corporate Executive Board, which is now Gartner.
Correct.
Moved back to India to head their finance and strategy practice in India. Soon after coming here, found out I was pregnant. So had hardly found a place to actually live, right?
Okay.
Still looking for rented accommodations. In the middle of that, you find out you're pregnant. You don't know a gynecologist. I hadn't lived in India for probably 8 years, right? So I had no network, right? And so suddenly you're like, okay, fine, now I have to deal with new job, new title, new location, and then baby coming.
Wow, so 4 big variables.
Huge. But you know, that's life, right? You kind of figure it out. But you're never fully prepared for you. There is no manual for how to be a parent, right? And so, you kind of just hope that you prod along and you hope that everything ends up okay. But I guess a 6 month or so started having trouble with the pregnancy, right? Yeah. And so Sidhu was actually born about a month and a half early. And the first 2 years of his life, he had tremendous. So when he was born, he was in the neonatal ICU for about 10 days. He didn't cry when he was born. He had major respiratory issues. So the first 2 years of his life, every month we were in and out of the pediatric ICU, and there was one time when he was 3 or 4 months old that, he just suddenly had a seizure. I was holding him in my arms and I couldn't feel his heartbeat, right? I could not, when you do this with your finger, your blood stops and then you do this and then the blood comes back. I did that. I was just pale, right? And it happened twice that day. And the first time it happened, we called the doctor and then, the doctor said, okay, fine, is he stable now? I said, yes. And then it happened again that day. And so this continued for 2 years or so, right? So it's incredibly stressful, but there's nothing you can do. You just take it one day at a time, right? And you're not in control of anything. And so you realize, you just have to take every day as it comes. But I think once his health stabilized, when he was about 3 years old or so, we then put him into school. And, at school, I realized the first couple of teachers he had identified, he has milestone delays and, you should get some assessments done. You should do X, Y, and Z. And of course, it's stressful for a new parent, right? You've just about come to terms with the fact that your child has overcome all these health issues. And then suddenly you have the whole world putting expectations on your child. And as a first-time parent, you don't know whether or not your child is on track or not. And it is very worrying if you feel like the child's not going to be able to keep up with the rest of the class, right? Because you feel they'll be judged and so on. And so we then ended up doing therapy, we did assessments, all of that stuff. And it was relentless, right? And then when he was about 5 or so, and he was in, so this is all like, it's not even full school, right? It was like pre-nursery, right? And the child is already being judged and evaluated.
What kind of milestone? I know I've heard this a lot from new parents who measure this a lot. I don't think when we grew up it was that much of a thing.
I don't know. I think our parents probably didn't focus on it so much, and there were larger families, right? So grandmothers were more involved and all of that stuff, and they're like, "Okay, it's okay, put it in."
Yeah, now nuclear families.
Yeah, so it's more, and then there's more pressure on the parents, and so by the time he went to kindergarten, I think I by then was kind of, okay, he's going to have milestone delays, we'll support him the best he can, etc. And then in his kindergarten class, he had this amazing teacher who, she called us for a parent-teacher meeting. And I went with dread, right? Wondering, oh my gosh, now what? Because every time I went to a parent-teacher meeting, there was going to be some news, which was going to be like just heartbreaking, right? And she said, Siddharth's doing really well. And I show his work to the other kids and look at what he's done. And she had such pride in her on her face. And I knew that he was in good hands with her. And I think that for me was the moment where I could see the difference that a teacher made in a child's life, right? How
In Delhi, in
this is in
Gurgaon.
Gurgaon. And transformative, right? And for a parent, suddenly I was like, I am amazed that you see his potential, because as his mother, I watch him every single day. I see the moments and I know what he's capable of, right? And I don't want a school to write him off. I don't want a teacher to write him off. And here you are, who's recognized his child's potential and is actually going to help him succeed. And I think that time for me, professionally, I was just up for a promotion and, was on track to kind of hit the next career ladder. And for me at that point, I think my passion for education was always there on the back burner, but I had never fully figured out how to make a difference to society or back to education, right? And I think when all of these things kind of started happening at the same time, I was like, with Sidhu, with my own child, I've had the resources, I'm able to offer him good health facilities, I'm able to get him into a good school, and therefore he has a real shot at life and he has a chance to actually achieve his potential. But there are so many children in India who just don't receive any opportunity. They get written off, and it is a crime, right? Imagine there is so many Sidhus out there who just may get written off, may not go to a great school. If they go to a great school and they're not if if they're lagging in the class and they're not hitting grade level expectations, the teacher may not focus on them and therefore they'll continue to lag or they won't understand. And I think for me at that time, I thought, in whatever way I can, I want to be able to, I've tried my best with my own son. I want to do whatever I can to prevent this happening to other children in India, right? And I think that's what made me then say, okay, I've now hit a particular professional milestone. Um, I have, climbed that corporate ladder. Now, either I continue doing this as, a managing director for the next 5 years, because also when you get promoted, you feel very responsible, right, to the organization, and the org's taken a bet with you. So you can't just leave immediately, right? So either I do this for the next 5 years or I make a move now, right? And I think for me, there's one thing that I always live by, which is, what if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, right? Constantly. I think you've heard me say that. I don't know if you have.
Yeah, of course.
But it's the way I live my life, right? What if I get hit by a bus tomorrow? And I think I asked myself that question, and I was like, I don't want to lose more time. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, I will look back and I will regret that I didn't make that move to the education sector. So I think I was about 34 at the time, 33, 34. And I thought, most people do it when they've retired, right? When they're hitting their 50s or their 60s. But I was like, when I'm in the prime of my life and in my professional career, there is no better time for me to make a difference than now, right? Because this is when I'm at my best. This is when I'm at my peak. And this is when I should actually be contributing.
So this was just a feel. So did you have any interactions, any work at any of your stints before? Or was it just motherhood and Sidhu that said, hey, you know what, I need to do something in this space, because it's been, whatever, it's taken a few years of...
Yeah. So my master's degree was in development studies, right? And so development was a core reason to kind of say, okay, how do I understand inequality? And then when I came back to India, I joined McKinsey. And of course, McKinsey had, I was with the consumer goods and retail practice. And there was a study that was happening with Pratham. And Pratham at that time was only in Mumbai, right? So the study at that time, and this is 2000, Madhav Chauhan was heading Pratham at that time. And in 2000, McKinsey was involved in some amazing work with Pratham, right? Pratham was looking at getting a really high-powered board together, looking at their pan-India strategy. How are they going to move from Mumbai to then working nationally? What was their growth plan going to be? And I just kind of, because of my background in development, I just gravitated to that study. So while I wasn't on the study, I just got to see the decks. And I was like, this is so inspiring, right? What he's been able to build and what Pratham has been able to do. And then I remember there were a couple of us who were like, okay, if we want to get involved, we can't do it on the study, but let's go and visit. And I think Madhav had come into the office one day and I was just in awe of what he had been able to do and how he brought such passion to Pratham. So I went to Chandni Chowk to visit a couple of their remedial centers, right? And there were these young women who had just finished college before getting married, who were teaching, and the children were learning so well. And I think that just always stayed with me, right? The transformative power of that young girl and how she was able to actually teach that child effectively, right? So that Pratham study was a big one. And then there were just a lot of signs from the universe. So I went from McKinsey to the World Bank. And I went to the World Bank and I was working with their main economics unit, right? It was called PREM. It was policy reform and economic management. But it was working on large fiscal adjustment programs, structural adjustment programs in different states. And I was working on Uttar Pradesh. And the education, so I was like, okay, let's find out what the education sector is doing. So the education sector colleagues were so much fun. Yeah. They were like the cool kids, you know, for me at least. I don't know if they were the cool kids, but for me, they were the cool kids. And the person who was heading the education practice at the World Bank, Vinita Kaul, was also on the board of Pratham, right? So I was like, oh, wow. So there's a Pratham connection here also. And then I stayed in touch with Madhav. And so while I was at the bank, I was going off and like, you know, attending the Delhi chapter of Pratham meetings and then occasionally meeting Madhav and helping him with decks and things like that. And so that was kind of the beginning for me, right? In terms of my exposure to education. And then when I was in DC, when I was working there, I had tried to help set up the Pratham DC chapter. Right? But so I think for me, education at that time, and Pratham was one of the only organizations in the 2000s that was really working deeply on education and then also looking at scale, right? So you started hearing a lot more about Pratham. But then when I wanted to shift to the education sector, I knew nothing about the education sector, right? I'd spent like 8 years abroad and was in the corporate sector, came back and I'd heard of Teach for India and I'd heard of Pratham. Correct. And I knew nobody else, right? Correct. So then I have to like do my research because first of all, I have no skills, right? Yeah. I mean, I think I have skills, but those are different types of skills. Correct. I don't know what skills the education sector needs. Correct. Right? I don't know what kind of a job I will get, what kind of positions are there. I don't know what orgs look like in terms of their culture, right? Because I was also coming from a very fast-paced role, which was extremely diverse and working across geographies. And I was like, I don't know how nonprofits work. I don't know their operating model, right? So I need to find an org that I will be able to really fit with, right? And that I will be able to work at pace with. Right? So that's where the journey started. So I went with kind of clean slate and I just kept asking people, right? Like, can you help me understand? And at that point, I think I had kind of decided that my preference was education, but, you know, education or health were both pretty important, right? Okay. So then, you know, just basically talked to a bunch of people, talked to a couple of search firms, said, here's my passion, here's my interest, this is what I want to do. Do you have anything? Do you know if any organizations are looking? And yeah, I think that's how it all started.
Wow. What happened after that?
So,
and how long did it take for you to say, okay, this is what I want to do next?
So I was in no hurry to leave, but it took me about, I guess, 6 to 9 months to actually be able to land on what I wanted to do. Okay. Right? So there is a UK-based charity called ARC, right, which was looking at, you know, how to think about the charter school model and think about how that would operate in a country like India, right? And charter schools have had mixed success in the US and in the UK, but ARC has had phenomenal results in terms of the turnaround of schools and the kind of transformation they've been able to bring about. And these are, you know, the kids that come to the ARC schools are not screened in any way, right? So these are schools where there's absolutely no screening. So there's no, you know, creamy layer that goes to the charter schools. Right? There's no selection that happens. And so it was very inspiring. But then when I met with a bunch of folks at ARC, I think I just felt so good about the people that I met because I felt they were all extremely competent, extremely smart, very fast-paced, and they were just working on exactly the kind of issues that I wanted to work on. And so when I looked at the job description, I was like, if I could have written a job description myself, this is what I would have written for myself. And so that's how it happened.
Wow. And you spent like 2.5 years there?
Yeah. So that was a couple of years.
And what were the highlights there? Like, what is your main charter for yourself, and like how did that kind of move into starting Peepul? Because I want to kind of get to the journey from there to there.
So ARC was, charter schools have had networks of excellence, right? So, charter schools have essentially been, you look at creating exemplars and you look at, showing the transformation that's possible. But you've not really seen so many examples of charter schools at scale, right? And I think as I was...
what exactly the charter school just define that?
So a charter school is where you may have, for example, you may have a government school that's operating, and the operations of that, and it may be a failing school where, learning outcomes are not particularly strong, children are not meeting grade level expectations. Simply take a decision to say, okay, fine, we're going to transfer the operations of the school. That gives a lot of autonomy to the charter school operator to actually bring around that turnaround. So charter schools, so you can imagine that charter schools are extremely intensive, right? Because it's almost like you take on an entire school of, let's say, 1,000 children. You have to then completely turn around the learning outcomes in that school, right? But it's intensive to work in one particular school. Like if you look at schools, in Delhi today, it takes a lot of work to run one excellent private school,
Yeah,
high-end private school. And so if you think of charter schools, imagine doing 10 of those or 20 of those and making sure that each has the same look and feel, right? So the intensity of that. It's very challenging to think about what scale looks like, right? Because scale in India for education is 1.1 million schools, million government schools, right? You've got about 140 to 150 million children studying in 1.1 million schools,
correct.
Right? So 10 schools is a drop in the ocean, right? 100 schools is a drop in the ocean, right? So the big question was, you can create an excellent example of what is possible in a government school setting. How are you going to scale that?
Yeah.
Right? How are you actually going to embed that into the government school system so that the government school system can actually transform, right? Or if you can't, then you're just creating a parallel system.
Yeah.
Which is a parallel system, right? And how sustainable is that going to be? You're just going to need a lot of time, money, effort to create that parallel system. And there are no particular economies of scale that you can hit, right?
Correct.
Each school costs a certain amount of money to run. You have to fundraise if you increase the number of your schools, et cetera, et cetera. And so, but the most important thing is that you have a government administrative machinery, you have budget, you have resources. So wouldn't that money be much better spent in actually co-designing and co-implementing with the government to improve the quality of delivery in government schools, correct, rather than actually running a parallel system?
Correct.
Right? So for us, what happened is, for me, I kept getting asked, okay, well, what does scale mean? How are you going to achieve this at scale? And I think that's the question that I kept getting asked.
Correct.
And for me, that was what kept me up at night. And I wasn't sure how to make that happen, right? And so when we kind of set up Peepul, I think the first thing we had to do was actually determine what scale was going to look like for us, right? Really try and answer that question. How are we going to work with government? Are we going to work with teachers? Are we going to work with school leaders? Are we going to run schools? What does sustainability look like? We had very limited funding, right? Very limited funding.
But before we come to that, like, you wanted to work with the government to at scale create impact for learning outcomes in government-run schools. Was the initial vision that broad?
Yeah.
Because you're saying motherhood and seeing Sidhu go through things as a high-end rising corporate executive, followed by learning that unscalable models in education don't really work until you work with places where the capital is. I agree completely. But those are the two data points that said, okay, but then did you say, okay, I want to do this for kids under the age of 9, or I want to do this in economically weaker parts of government schooling? So, like, did you you choose where to play, or did you just say, hey, this has to be broad, and then you'll figure out how to kind of start everything?
I just knew the problem was immense, right? I was like, I just want to help as many kids as I can.
Learn better.
Yeah, learn better, right? There are 140, 150 million kids in India studying in government schools, right? That's the size of the problem that we're dealing with. So how many schools can I impact was the question, right? And where can I stop? Because you don't want to just scale for scale's sake, right? You want to scale with impact, and that's the toughest thing to do.
Correct.
Right? But very early on, when we did set up Peepul, that was a big bet that we took, which was to say, and that was a conscious bet that we took with our board to say, there are different paths to scale. We can maybe run our own schools and create exemplar schools and show what's possible. And there's great power in having demonstration schools.
Correct.
Or we can then work on a couple of interventions, which might be in or outside the system. Or we basically say, or we can work with low-cost private schools, where a lot of low-income families actually send their children. They're sending them to low-cost private schools, right? Where you pay between 500 to 700 rupees a month, right? Or we basically say, look, we're going to work and take a bet with working with government school systems. And I think we ultimately discussed and went back and forth a lot. And we said, if we're really serious about scale, then we have to work with government, right? And the government is where serious scale is. And it may require, longer setup time, deeper trust relationships, a different mode of operating. But in principle, as a board, we said, are we taking this bet to say we're going to bet with this particular approach and this model? And at that point, the answer was yes. And once we landed on that answer, then it was a question of, okay, how do we make this happen?
Who was the initial team, and how did you get to this, this crystallized point of view that this is what you want to do? 140 million kids, work with the government, make sure learning outcomes are measured and that they're high quality, and we start with one and then move on. But was it just you working with a few things? How did that initial thinking happen?
We have this incredibly inspiring education director, Urmila Chaudhary, right? She's incredibly humble, right? So she introduces herself as a teacher, despite all of the other amazing things that she has done. She was an educator, school leader at Shridam School. She then worked with, many other nonprofits. She was my conscience. She was the person on the team, the person on the leadership team who had the wisdom to actually lean in and say, okay, reality check. Because I'm not an educationist, right? I've never taught, except for maybe 1 year somewhere between school and college. I was like assistant teacher, not serious. Kind of serious,
Yeah.
but I think it's serious. I don't know if everybody else knows.
I'm sure, but nothing compared to what you were doing.
Urmila, 20 years of experience as an educator, right? And I think she was the person that I relied on to actually help me understand how we were going to approach this massive problem, right? And then our board was incredible, right? So we've got Vibha Parthasarathy on our board, Abha Adams on our board, again, very eminent educators, right? Who were actually there to actually give us some deep practitioner experience and some grounding.
Right? But then I think you started this solo, right? Or you got everyone together. How did you get all of them together? All these, every time I see people and the work you do, I see you having a massive backing of some really world-class people. And as a founder, I think one of the things people always talk about is how do you kind of create followership amongst truly exceptional people? How did you do that in 2017, 2018, in initial days when visions are not super crystallized and so on?
So with Urmila, it was like love at first sight.
Okay.
Right? We were going through interviews with many different education director candidates, all coming from very different backgrounds.
When you say we, who was that? You and who?
Me. Sorry.
Okay. I don't know why you keep saying we. I'm asking about how you found it and you're like, we were 25 people. I said, one thing, hold on. You just left something to start, and how did you suddenly get to 25 people? Because that was a leap I had not made. But sorry, go on. You were looking.
We were already supporting a school.
Okay.
We were already supporting a school. So we had some teachers and we had folks on staff that were actually already, supporting a school. I think when I met Urmila, I came out of that room just saying, yeah, she's the one. I use that exactly. I was like, she's the one. She's the right one. And so I think it was like that with her, right? And once you have, a trusted partner on that journey with you, and you have an initial set of people who are there on the team to kind of get things going, then I think I just shamelessly asked people for help, right? So Soumya Rajan, our first board member, I had met her in a completely different setting, right? She was on the board of another nonprofit, and that's how I met her, because we were talking about that nonprofit, and she and I really, I really liked her, right? I don't know if she liked me back.
I'm sure she would.
But I
She's on your board, right?
She's on our board.
I'm sure she likes. Sure she does.
But with Soumya, one of the things that she used to say at that time was, she continued to be on the board of that nonprofit. And I said, Soumya, as we think about this entity and spinning off and working at scale and all of that, I'd really love to continue to benefit from your advice and support. Would it be okay if I kind of kept reaching out to you? And she used the word, we need to make sure that the center of gravity and the decision making for the organization happens in a way that you are able to scale with the benefit of guidance and impact, right? And I think that phrase, center of gravity, just making sure that we were able to create the right center of gravity for those decisions is something that stayed with me. And so as I kind of talked to her a couple of times, and I was like, so, one of the things I'll need is a board. Would it be okay? Would you be comfortable?
Definitely the first one.
Would you have the time to join the board? And I was expecting a no, right? Because who are we then, right? And she said, yeah, I'd be happy to help in any way possible. And then after that conversation, and I didn't know what a board member was supposed to do, But I was like, I have one, right? So one is better than zero, right? So the journey has started, right? And there are 25 folks on the team who are ready to start this journey, right? And I have Urmila, who is incredibly inspiring, and she knows what she's talking about. And I would trust her with my child any day, right? That's the kind of amazing educator she is. But so then the kind of ingredients started kind of coming together.
This is 2018 now?
2017. This is still 2017.
Still 2017.
Yeah. So I kid you not, I put into Google because I was like, okay, how does this work? So I think I said something like Gantt chart for setting up an entity or how to set up an entity.
Wow.
And it's not easy, right?
It's also it's because it's so misused.
Yeah.
And that's what I've heard.
Yeah.
At scale. That people who genuinely want to do it, there's a lot of friction for them.
Yeah, which is unfortunate, right? Because then it ends up taking a lot of your time, right? Because you're making sure that, and when you're well-intentioned, you don't want to make an inadvertent mistake, right? Because you're ignorant about some compliance rule or some regulation or some new requirement, right? Yeah. And so it's important to stay on top of all of these things. But once Soumya came on board, then I was like, okay, now what do I do? So we have one board member, and we have me, and we have Urmila, who are also members of the society. The legal entity had already been set up; it was active and all of that stuff. So then Soumya said, well, now put together. So I was like, what do we do about other members of the board, right? And she said, well, now put together a list of the skills that you need and the competency. She said, don't go for the most famous people. Don't come up with your wish list of, Mukesh Ambani, et cetera, et cetera. Figure out what skills you need on the board and then find the 5 best people who are best at that particular skill set. So I was like, okay, clearly I've made the right choice with my first board member. Great advice. So we did that. And then in the early days, to be honest, Shantanu, I think you're just so grateful when people join the board, right? And you're just like, oh, thank you so much. You said yes.
Yeah.
and you are genuinely, because at that point you're a smallish entity, you haven't quite figured out the model, you're still iterating. Um, and then in 2018, Ramesh Srinivasan, senior partner at McKinsey, who you know well, Ramesh and I met at JW Marriott, and we were catching up after many, many years. I had known him when I was at McKinsey, but we hadn't caught up after he had moved to the US and all of that stuff. And we caught up maybe after 10, 12 years, right? And it was an amazing conversation about education, something he's deeply passionate about. And he's involved with various different education nonprofits. And, at the end of that conversation, so I dropped him off to the airport, and I remember, again, we were just talking about how can we stay in touch? And I said, well, would you be able to join our advisory board? and he said, yeah, okay. or something along those lines, right? And I just said, like, today, yes, right? Because with me, you just need to give me like a partial yes, and I'll be like, okay, done. Sorted, bold, yeah.
That's amazing. It's amazing how much happens when you just ask.
But what Ramesh did was to shift my mindset, because Ramesh said, and then, that was an airport conversation where I was dropping him off in a cab. He was late to his flight. And I was like, okay, but has he actually said yes, right? Or let me just reconfirm, right? Because what does this mean? Can I actually invite him to board meetings and stuff? And, then we had a conversation about it on a phone call. And he said, Kruti, I'm just privileged to have been asked. Thank you so much for asking me to be on the board. And that for me was a huge mindset shift. I realized that there was something special that we were building and scaling, and that it is actually, a privilege to be on this journey for me, for others who are part of this journey, right? And so I didn't need to feel so grateful to ask, because this is something special. We've demonstrated impact. We have a really good team. It is actually an honor to be part of this journey.
Yeah, so I agree with you. Initial days, for example, when Ritika joined our company, I remember it being a huge favor to ask her to join, because we had no money, we had no brand name, we had no office, we had nothing really other than 4 or 5 months of revenues, one product, and only dreams and sapne. That's all we had, right? So when Ritika and I had the conversation at home, like she was like, generally she was kind of, in that typical, I'm getting bored at work, or, this is not fun, or, I want to do something exciting. And then Flipkart and not become big, So like the startup thing was like, this 2016 was like in the news a lot, but not a lot of us were doing it. So when she said, yes, I'll do it, was like a big deal. Okay, like people are ready to join you, people who trust you or might think of this as a career, or investors to put money, or someone to join the board, or senior people to join us, etc. It seemed like a big deal, and it was. Honestly, taking a bet early on people is a big deal, and you do feel grateful. But as the years progress, today, for example, I know how much pull we have for senior talent, because we're in the news a lot. We're a well-known brand. We are well-funded. We can afford salaries and so on. So people who take bets on us now, I don't feel grateful at all. Not that I don't feel grateful.
No,
I don't feel grateful in the same way. I don't feel, oh, tum pe aisa. No. I'm glad you accepted an offer to work with us. But I know what we can do for you. And more importantly, I know you know what we can do for you also, which is why you're doing what you're doing. So it doesn't feel like a favor anymore, in a way. Earlier it used to. To your question as to whether it has changed for me, it has. But to do it in 2016 or 2017 was a big deal.
It's a huge deal. Because it's also a huge responsibility, right?
Correct.
Because people are taking a bet with you, taking a bet with me, right? It's a huge responsibility. Right? You have to fund salaries. You have to stay calm. Everything else might be collapsing around you. Correct. And, funding might not be coming in. But you have to be that person who's holding it all together. And you have to have some vision that you can share with others to actually show them the light, right? And the best part is, or the worst part is, you don't know the probability of that vision coming true or not, right? Because so much depends on luck, right? And so much depends on other factors which are out of your control. So you can't say hand on heart that ye pakka ho jayega, right? And then imagine in the education space, there is no revenue source, right? So it's not like you can track milestones, right? It's not like you can track, okay, here's how much is going to come in every month, here's the conversion rate, etc. So aisa nahi hai, right? These are long-term social problems. So you just have absolutely no idea, right? So it's kind of like a Hail Mary from the get-go, right? It's like, I really hope we can pull this off. And I'm determined that we can pull this off. But at some point, I'm also just taking a bet with myself.
Yeah.
Right?
But I think earlier on, you are betting more on future and much less on track record because there is no track record. As a company, we are now 7 years old. I think now people are taking a bet on a combination of, hey, I can see potential, but I have seen 7 years of this team building something out into it. Which I think as you grow, you go more and more schools. I think track record plays an important role. But I totally hear you, man. Initial days would have been very, very difficult. So how did you guys get it off the ground with like 25, 30 of you, now 2, 3, 4 board members? You obviously have, a clear, I think a more crystallized vision of how you're going to create impact. But how did you take it off the ground to reach that 2020 moment where things took off for you?
So I think an early part of it was making that bet to work with government systems was a big one, right? Because that was actually a, put your stick in the sand moment and, what is your identity going to be as an organization kind of moment, right? And once we said that, we're like, okay, this is what we're going to do. Then, we had the schools, which had become truly exemplar. We had 85% of children in those schools meeting or exceeding grade level expectations, right? And these children are coming from families where they may be the first generation learners. Average household income is 6,000 to 7,000 rupees a month. Family of 4, right? So to show that these are grade level expectations that are not, there is no delta reduction for the schools that we were supporting compared to a high-end private school, right? The same grade level expectations, right? And so a lot of the early days was around actually saying, okay, we've created our seeing is believing model, right? So there is a story of how, the first person that ran the 4-minute mile, right? It took a while for that person to actually cross that record. Once he crossed that record, there were 10 people right after him that crossed that record within 6 weeks, right? So a lot of it is you get that first breakthrough, you show what's possible, and then you can say, okay, fine, now we have to figure out how to replicate it, right? But we had the proof points. So this was a huge turnaround, right? We had a lot of people come to see the schools. It had become a hub of just demonstration. So then once we said the bet is around working with government, then we had to start actually figuring out what that would mean at scale, right? So we started our first teacher development program, teacher training program, where we were working primarily with government teachers, right? So that was the first step towards saying, okay, we've done this with teachers that we have hired. Now, can we actually support government teachers and train them to adopt the same practices to lead to better classroom outcomes and better learning outcomes for the kids, right? Because you've already lost 2 spheres of control there, right? That's no longer the teacher is not responsible or accountable to you. There is no reason why they necessarily have to adopt those practices. It's an optional training, all of that stuff, right? So we started with that in 2017. And again, it's really just, I think our secret sauce, there are probably a couple of things, but I think the people that we have had at Peepul they are truly what has made the organization what it is today, right? So our teacher training lead, Sonia, joined in 2017. She joined for a particular role. Like 3 months in, she was like, I'm not sure I want to sign up for this, right? We were like, no, if anybody can, you can, right? And she was like, okay, challenge accepted. And, she made it happen. She then built a team. We started our teacher training program in Delhi. And, from then, we actually saw the change that was able to be brought about and the change in the classrooms that was able to be brought about. And so that happened. And so then, slowly momentum starts to build, right? We added a couple more board members. Fortunately, more people said yes. We had a couple of funding partners come on board. So that gave us
first check.
Blue Dart.
Really?
Yeah.
And what was their reason to believe or reason to do it? Was Blue Dart Global or Blue Dart India?
India.
Wow. Okay.
They take a bet with you. I think they, at many levels, they look into your eyes and they ask, is this person for real? Because there are a lot of people out there who can do work. And I think the person who heads CSR at the end of the day also has to go by gut and instinct, right? Do we think this person can do what she is saying she can do? And they hadn't seen the schools, they hadn't visited. So a lot of it was, and the whole CSR funding space also for me was very new, right? I had never done any of this stuff in the, corporate sector, right? So there was so much learning.
Most of your fundraising come from CSR or are there independent individual funders?
No, so what happened then was, we kind of, went along in soldiered on 2018, 2019. We wanted to see the impact of the teacher training work, continue to strengthen the schools, start thinking about Madhya Pradesh.
Also, learning outcomes take a few years.
Yeah, it does. Especially
a child in 4th standard, but
exactly.
Happens 7th, 8th.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because the child also grows, no? So how much of it is due to the school and how much of it is just, natural growth of the child, right? So, and we were only doing primary, right? So we're doing KG to 5. So the idea is also that if you do foundational literacy and numeracy, you're able to actually have a deeper impact because you're getting in at the early years, right? As opposed to remedial education when the child is already in 7th or 8th and they haven't had a strong base, then there's so much more to catch up on, right? And then the likelihood of the child dropping out of school is also much higher. So, then we started exploring in Madhya Pradesh whether we could think about a district transformation effort because, the government of Madhya Pradesh, the principal secretary there, the government stakeholders, extremely progressive, were, pioneering and thinking about, and very visionary and thinking about a lot of initiatives for education improvement in the state. And so we then said, okay, fine, maybe we should think about a district level approach. Right? And we took on one district, identified one district, which had about 3,000 schools, right? So we had our, base operations in Delhi with the exemplar schools, with the teacher training program. And then in Madhya Pradesh, we were all set to start this new model of district transformation, or not new model, but our model of saying, okay, fine, we've now done it. Let's think about how we do this operational approach at a level of a district. Right? And a district in India is, Madhya Pradesh has 53 districts. District in India is, pretty large in terms of geographical range, and 3,000 schools is quite a lot, right? But around that time is when we went to a couple of, so we got a couple of grants from other organizations in India and other foundations in India. One of them was the Nudge, and we had been selected for their accelerator program. And the first year grant was 50 lakhs. Right. But along with that just came a lot of just additional support by way of capacity building, networks, connections. And through the accelerator program, we were being mentored by a foundation called Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation. Right. And this phenomenal managing director at DRK, who was our mentor. Right. And the nudge was very clear. This is not a funding relationship that we're setting up for you. It's just a mentoring relationship. Right. And I was so grateful because Natalie, who was the MD at that time, working with us, every conversation with her was incredibly insightful and for me personally, very professionally challenging, right? And she asked me the right questions and stuff like that. And then in about 2 or 3 months, she said, we're thinking of actually starting the due diligence process with you to consider whether we'd like to bring you into the portfolio.
Oh, really? And
then I went back to Nudge and I was like, dude, I thought you told me that this is not going to set up funding. And this is what they just came back with. So is this for real? And they were like, go for it. So that's what they told us, but go for it. So then we went through the due diligence process of DRK, which took about 6 months. Okay. And, it's a very intensive process. I think they take somewhere between 15 to 20 organizations every year into the portfolio, 15 to 20 entrepreneurs every year and, thousands of applications that come in, right? So as part of that due diligence process, there was a lot of thinking that we had to do in terms of what our fundamental model and approach is, right? Because the question that DRK asked us was, okay, what is your product, right? What is it that you are trying to do as an organization and an entity, right? And till then, we had parts of the answer to that question, but we hadn't definitively said, this is our solution, right? So we hadn't said, because the problem again is so holistic.
Yeah, very open, no?
Right. So you have to do many things. But if somebody sits you down and says, no, tell me the 2 things that you're doing that are going to be transformative. It's a really tough question, right? Like, how do I prioritize? I think all of these things are needed. And it needs some real problem solving and, brain capacity to actually say.
We do this, but we actually don't do that.
Yeah, exactly.
So what we don't do is just as important.
So the leadership team at that point, we all sat down and, we were in our office, like one long weekend, fighting with each other, actually saying, okay, what is the model? What is it at the end of the day? That is our solution, right? And, sometimes the answer is just common sense, right? So what DRK's due diligence process helped us do was actually to really clarify our model. So we said at the heart of what we do is, at the what of it is improved student engagement. So what's happening in many schools is you've got enrollment largely sorted because you have government schools within a 2 to 3 kilometer radius. You have midday meals. And you've got, teachers tracking attendance and cluster and block level officials tracking attendance. And with the midday meal scholarships and so on, you've made a lot of headway on attendance.
Kids show up.
So kids show up in school, and then kids are coming into school because of certain benefits that a government school provides. Now, the piece where it's not sufficient is student engagement, right? So how does the teacher and the child meaningfully interact in a way that it actually improves student learning outcomes? What is the process of engagement with the child that the teacher is doing for you to really learn, right? And there is rigor there. It's not just that I need to listen to everything you're saying, or, it's not just that I need to make sure I
complete listen to this or whatever.
It's something, I need to know your name, first of all, right? Do I know your name? Right? But the entire process of student engagement is what we said was the missing piece, right? If you can focus on improving student engagement in the classroom, that is going to get you to improved learning outcomes. Wow. Right? And it sounds like common sense.
It's a very nuanced.
It's hard, right? It's really hard. Because imagine, even in a high-end school, in a classroom, even if you take, a school a classroom which has 25 kids, right? What are the tactics, the pedagogy that teacher is going to use to engage every single child and make sure that every single child is on their learning journey, right? So deconstructing what student engagement means, right? And actually simplifying it and saying, okay, the what is student engagement, right? And that is what we are focused on as an organization, right? What is the goal? The goal is meeting grade level expectations on literacy and numeracy, right? Those 2 things, full clarity, right? In our exemplar schools, you go to our exemplar schools, you see what effective student-teacher engagement looks like on a daily basis when you enter the classroom, right? For me, the litmus test of our exemplar schools is, would I send Siddharth to the classroom? Would I send him to the school? That good, right? And that is really the litmus test, right? It's not just incrementally better, right? It is distinctly better and superior for you to want to send your own child to that school, right? And on top of it, government schools are free. There are so many other benefits. There is so much land in Delhi and in urban centers as well. There's no shortage of space. But then the challenge is, so we've got the what and we've got the goal. Now, when you work at scale, you can do that in 10 classrooms. You can do that in 100 classrooms. At scale, in Madhya Pradesh, you have 100,000 schools. You have 95 lakh children studying in 100,000 schools, and you have 320,000 teachers. How are you going to make...
And let me see the match. You have 95 lakh kids in 1 lakh class. You have 95 kids per classroom, which is like very high.
No, school. 100,000 schools.
Schools, okay. So you have 95 kids in school. Understood. And this is just primary, or this is all schools?
All schools. So you've got predominantly primary, 90% plus in rural areas. Okay. And so many of these schools in Madhya Pradesh, at least because they're in rural areas, are 1 to 2 to 3 classroom schools.
Like 20, 30 kids.
Sometimes.
Like what do you see in movies, basically?
Yeah. And then some schools may be much larger and some may be model schools and so on and so forth. But on average.
3,20,000 teachers for 95 lakh kids. So you basically have 35 kids to a teacher.
Mota, but then you also have variance, right? So you might have one school in a rural area where you've got one teacher teaching all, and then all, maybe 4 grades, right?
And all subjects.
And all subjects. Wow. Right? So, tough. So how do you then...
It took a long time to just get the scale of the problem, and still probably it's a lot more complex than...
Because then you've got, 90% plus in rural areas. Then you've got tribal schools. Then you've got dialects. Then you've got, language becomes a big thing. Then you've got, diversity of... you've got differing levels of infra, right? Where do you start? Then, issues around, teacher allocation, all of that stuff.
So when you go into a state, let's say you decide to go to...
Wait. So the thing is, when you think about scale, what? So then, when you think about scale, okay, how do you make student engagement happen in every school?
I am the teacher, you're the student, thing is real. In this conversation, go ahead.
You're the teacher.
No, you're the teacher.
I'm the teacher.
I'm learning.
First time in my life.
I'm learning.
I'm engaging.
Go ahead, yes.
We'll codify this. But at scale, how do you make it happen? So you know the what, but then what is the how, right? So then we said, okay, we're going to distill it to 3 things, which are must-haves. One is teacher skilling, right? So if you want to make student engagement happen, first the teacher has to have the skills and be equipped with what they need to be able to actually do effective student engagement. So things like, small practices like cold calling or behavior management or, just small things, basically distilling what student engagement is all about and then saying at scale, teacher skilling is fundamentally important, right? Because if your teacher doesn't know, how will they implement? A second component of it is mentoring and coaching and real-time coaching, right? So
to the teacher
or the school leader, right? So
why do you use school leader?
Because you might have different terms. You might have a principal, but you might have a teacher in charge. You may go to a training program and it may be phenomenally amazing. But then when you go back to your classroom, you're working with the same constraints, the same kids, and you're trying to bring all of those things that you learned, but you're dealing with the same constraints, resource limitations, all of those things, right? And it's very easy to go back to the ways of working that you had previously. How do you sustain that, right? And the best way to sustain it is, like you and I have learned, right? Just real-time coaching, right? Iteration, feedback, etc. So a lot of what, the way that the administrative layers are set up in government schools systems is you've got at the cluster, block, district level, you've got officials that are responsible for mentoring and coaching of the schools and the teachers, right? And their role is, for example, at the cluster level or the block level, block academic coordinator, right? So their fundamental job is to actually go visit the schools, provide feedback and see how things are happening. I would say about 70% of their time currently is spent on a lot of administrative tasks because there is so much in the system, right? You have to look at midday meal compliance, you have to look at attendance. And so you're probably spending only 20 to 30% of your time on actual feedback, right? So we really want to flip that, right? We want to say 70% of your time has to be on academic support and coaching and mentoring and feedback so that your teacher those messages are getting reinforced because what gets measured gets done, right? So you may be a great teacher and you may have taken back all of these fantastic ideas on pedagogy. You go in and you start implementing them. Somebody comes and starts observing your classroom and says, "Ye kya kar rahe ho? Why are you making the children sit like this? This makes no sense." So unless you work with that layer of administrative officials and actually think about tools to do better coaching, mentoring, monitoring, you can't have a holistic approach to systemic change, right? So you've got the teacher skilling, mentoring and coaching, and then you've got incentives and accountability, right? So at the level of policy, at the level of rewards and recognition, how are you making sure that as a system, you're working on the right incentives and accountability mechanisms to make sure learning outcomes are front and center? So that's what we then clarified as our model, right? And that's where we were like, thank you, DRK, because thanks to your due diligence, we've actually arrived at this, which is extremely helpful for us. regardless of whether or not we get chosen for the portfolio?
In the balcony and on the dance floor. So when you're in the balcony, you can have a very zoomed out view of the situation. You can see what music is playing, what's the vibe of the room, are the people serving the food and the alcohol efficient enough, etc. That's all balcony level stuff. On the dance floor, you get to really feel the music and you can vibe with the people and so on, but you can't see. So there is a value to both, and good leaders have to kind of be on the dance floor in their companies or in their organizations, and then kind of take a step back and go alternate between the balcony and the dance floor. And I remember something very similar happened at Bombay Shaving Company also. Around the same time, probably 2019, when Six Sense invested in us. So DRK was for you, was Six Sense for us. And Nikhil, who's the founder at Six Sense, basically asked me a very, very fundamental question, right? And I back myself, and I think most of us do, on being able to articulate a great story and a brand vision or whatever, right? And he said, what does Bombay Shaving Company actually stand for? And I told him, and he said, if I were to take 10 of your consumers and ask them to stand here and ask them this question, would they say exactly what you have said, or would they say something? And I said, that probably not. Like, then it doesn't stand for it. It stands for it in your head, but doesn't really stand for it. What you are saying is a very founder/manufacturer/brand first articulation. Consumer should have a very different articulation of it, right? Which is this simple. So what does Maggi stand for? 2-minute noodles. What does Dairy Milk stand for? Great chocolate. What does, whatever. What does Dove stand for? Moisturizing soap. What does Dettol stand for? Anti-germ. And Maggi can have like tomato sauce and soups and everything, but they still stand for two. What is it that you really stand for? So for us,
the
Nikhil question really forced us to say, hey, we have hair oils and beard washes and razors and shaving foam. We're doing everything for everyone. And we actually stand for nothing. We want to stand for something. We're not brave enough to stand for something and not stand for other things. Because we are very revenue hungry, which is something which, like you're learning outcomes hungry, we were revenue hungry because that's what growth meant for us. We had to really step back and say, hold on. And COVID helped in a big way, right? Because it forced you to step back naturally. You were in zero revenue, the warehouses are shut, people are not coming to office. What do? So you focus on important and urgent strategic priority. It is, what do we stand for? And we realized that consumers loved us for hair removal hygiene solutions. So whether it was women or men, when it came to removing hair off the body, they loved us, and we immediately could have tailwinds when we launched a product. In other categories, we struggled. In body washing, we struggled. So we then kind of said, hey,
I used your body wash.
well, you're one of few. So I wish more people. Body wash is a very price sensitive category. So Nivea, Fiyama, etc. First of all, moving people of soap to body wash is complicated. So body wash छोटा ही है वैसे भी. उसमें भी हम लोग महंगे थे. So plus we were a shaving company. So there were a lot of headwindy, category level things that we could not move in that. But trimmers flew.
Razors
flew. Women razors flew. We were known as a men's grooming business. We launched a women's brand. Siddharth joined us to head our women's business. It was counterintuitive.
That was 2020.
Our conversation 2021. But we started the business in 2020. She joined us once we kind of hit some kind of PMF. We said, okay, fine, we need a CEO for this. So then she came in. But you're right. Someone asking you, and you're right. In retrospect, it sounds commonsensical and kind of base. But at that time, it's so important to crystallize. If this is what we do.
And the amount of angst that goes into it, because it's important to get it right. Because the cost of getting it wrong is really high.
You stick to it and then you invest in it, and there are allocation things.
Exactly. And you stick to it. Exactly. You take a bet and then you stick to it at least for 3 years.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
And then with DRK, we also had a conversation with Mulago at that time, where they were considering me for a Mulago fellowship. They have this Mulago Fellows program. One is on, climate, and the other is on social entrepreneurship. And they select 10 fellows every year. And so again, these are stressful conversations, right? Because every conversation is a make or break, right? It's an elimination process. So you have one interview, then you have another interview, and you don't quite, I'd heard of Mulago. I didn't quite realize how amazing and pioneering they are. And I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to do my best, and hopefully, I don't know where it'll go, but maybe it'll clarify for me what it is that we do and whether they like it and how it resonates with a broader global audience, right? And so the process of, so Mulago and DRK both happened around the same time. And so that year I was selected for the Mulago Fellowship, right? This is all like Jan to April, right? The Mulago Fellowship results, happened in April. DRK decision happened around
How much did
April,
DRK
May.
read?
So DRK has a policy of, they choose the entrepreneur, they support you for 3 years and they give you $100,000 every year. And that was a lot of money for us, right?
It is. It's a lot of money.
Mulago is a fellowship. So you go through the fellowship for a year and you get a grant at the beginning of the year, you get a grant at the end of the year. And because it was also, so COVID had just set in at that time, right? So the fellowship is usually in person. It's a series of, week-long retreats in person. So at that time, they didn't really know how the fellowship was going to play out. But then I was selected for the fellowship. I was the only Indian that year. And I remember right after getting the call from them saying, okay, you've made it, my second question was why? Like, what did you like about us, right? But, it's a bit like, okay, what is because you want to find out, right? Like, what is resonating about your model? Because you're still looking for that sense of, am I on the right track? Right? Some validation from folks who have been through the journeys before, right? But again, I think both DRK and Mulago took a bet with us, right? And I was grateful for that bet, because then what happened is, you were asking that question, right? Like, who supports you? So with DRK and Mulago, then that helped us understand the broader funder landscape internationally, right? Because sitting in India, having started with broadly CSR funding, figuring out scale, future strategy, it's really hard to figure out what are sources of funding globally, and also to get a foot in the door, right? You really need to get folks to back you. Word of mouth is a huge thing. And so that happened in 2020. And that gave us, some good momentum to kind of then make sure we had the resources that we need. Funny story, not a funny story. Just, again, this is like what happens if you get hit by a bus and kind of anything can happen any day type of thing, right? January 2020, one of the organizations, CSR, that had said they will, fund our teacher training program, their board suddenly shifted away from education. And we thought the funding was sorted and committed, right? Suddenly December, we had planned, we had hired a team, planned according to it, all of that, right? Suddenly 2019, that money we were told is not going to come in, right? That was about 60 lakhs, right? So suddenly in 2020, I'm looking at the finances and I'm like, okay, how much cash flow do we have right now, right? How much can we sustain? We can't, there is no way that we can, resource back any of our schools, right? These are kids who are studying in the schools. You can't take it back. You can't disinvest from a school. You have to find a way, right? And we had maybe, 2 months of cash flow at that time. And we had a team of probably about 40, 50 people, right? So you're basically writing up proposals for 10 lakhs. You're pulling out, friends and family saying, how do I get, at least enough coverage to last me for a couple of months until I get my decision from X, Y, and Z, right? Because every funding decision has a, time period of 6 to 12 months, right? So it's not like everything.
It was crazy. Everything was kind of, people were just holding.
So this is, so this is Jan 2020, right? And that year, so Ramesh kind of makes a contribution to Peepul every year, right? And, I had shared with Ramesh that, things are not, we need to figure this out. And that year he said, okay, why don't you take 2 years of my financial support in 1 year? And that tided us, that so it's what you said about Ritika, right? That matters so much, because in that time of difficulty, having that support meant the world, right? And that is when, that that person is going to be with you forever, right?
That's what they say about investors. Even in for-profit situations, everyone will back you when you're flying. Because everyone wants to fly,
Yeah.
backing you when you're on the ground and almost out is what differentiates great investors from not so great ones, because especially assets that they see value in, right? So I think it's very commendable, because 2020 was hard for anyone, and for an individual to do it more than
Yeah, exactly.
it counts. He's a corporate salaried person end of the day.
Exactly.
For him to kind of table capital individually in a tough time is quite exemplary.
So this is
But
before.
knowing him, I can totally imagine him doing.
Indeed. But this is before COVID happened, right? So this is still Jan 2020, and this happened. This severity happened because one of our committed funders had to pull out at the last moment, right? So we had still not scaled, right? So we were still kind of, the support from Ramesh helped us, and then DRK added us to the portfolio. Mulago Fellowship came through, so then we had a little more space, right? But I think that's the thing as a leader at that point, when you can see that crisis, you just cannot afford to. You have to stay the course, right? That's when character sets in, and that's when you are just like, look, I'm going to make it happen, and you just have to go in with that, and either it happens or you crash and burn.
You
You die trying.
You die trying.
You die trying, right? And then COVID happened, and school closures happened. And so in Madhya Pradesh, the entire district transformation effort that we had planned, suddenly there are no schools, right? So what are you going to transform? There are no more schools. I mean, schools are not running, they're not operational. So then we kind of pivoted very quickly and focused all our attention on the teacher skilling component of our model.
So that could happen remotely.
So that could happen. We took some big bets around how we're going to distribute it using, Diksha, which is the national technology platform for education, led to immediate success in the first couple of weeks. But there was a lot of careful program design associated with it, right? So nothing that we've done has been that we have gotten lucky. A lot of it has been deliberate planning, vision setting, and then extreme execution.
You've basically taken every government school teacher in Madhya Pradesh and trained them.
So the first year in 2020 was all digital. And so we didn't have, to create a digital course, imagine our team had never created digital courses, right? So they had always done in-person training. So overnight, they had to learn how to create a digital course, right?
Now the what of student engagement and now the how through. Now I'm assuming now that schools are running is a combination of in-person and what you guys built over the last 2-3 years.
So then, but even I think for us, we always had our long-term sights clear. I think that clarity of thought was always there, right? So even in 2020, it was never short-term. It was not we stop at digital. We always wanted to think about what does teacher professional development mean? How do we re-architect and reimagine teacher professional development? What are the components of that? Because this is a 3-year strategy. It's not a 1-year play, right? It's not just a COVID response.
That's incredible.
But truly, it's been genuinely, it's just been a phenomenal team. So last year, we went from 90 at the beginning of the year to 150 when we closed the year. Our grant income went from 11 crores to this year ending at about 25 crores. So now we are like mid to large nonprofit, right? Which, the years go by so fast, Shantanu.
This is incredible. It's incredible. I also of course, Viren at OGQ, and similar, right? You and Viren remind me of each other a lot because you are so passionate about what you do, and I think for you, opportunity cost is huge. You could literally do whatever you want to do in the corporate world, make so much money and do all of that. But you're saying, hey, my life purpose is different. Even Viren's life purpose is to win Olympic golds for India.
Yeah.
And his unnerving belief that when India wins Olympic golds, communities and towns and cities kind of are uplifted at an infra level and at a spirit and emotional level. And it's proven, it's happened in the UK, it's happened in China, it's happened whenever a country kind of took that. And to see you kind of have unnerving belief that if you increase student engagement outcomes at scale, you're able to truly make nation building impact, because that's Like what better purpose of life could be there? It's actually fascinating to see. Also, Kruti, to be honest, like as a friend, sometimes because you're very close to someone, and the relationship is very casual and friendly, you sometimes discount how much they've actually achieved professionally, right? So I'm so happy that we have done this because now I have a far higher. I knew a lot of this, right? But when you kind of go through it in a lot more detail, you have a much higher appreciation. Now that you've done it in one state,
Two.
of course, Delhi,
Delhi.
one state outside Delhi. Uh, is this something that you're going to say, okay, now this is where the S curve kind of takes off, and we need to go from 300,000 to 3 million?
Sometimes success is seen as, oh, just go to more states. We don't need to necessarily be executing these programs in each of the states, right? Our premise and our bet or our working model is for the government to ultimately be the doer, right? Not for us to be a parallel system that's creating impact outside of the government. Right? So from the get-go, how are you actually going to co-design and co-implement with the government, right? When we go outside of a state, then you don't have to go district by district, state by state, and firefight in each particular geography. Right? So I would say nationally, probably a couple more states, but nationally also, the Ministry of Education, Government of India, right? They do a lot of just, innovation, policy design, intervention prioritization. So at the level of MOE, right, if you can actually say, here is a blueprint for high quality teacher professional development, and actually take that to MOE and say, here's a blueprint and here's a track record of how it's worked in Madhya Pradesh, and this is why it's innovative, this is why it's had impact, and here are the metrics. You share that and then let MOE actually distribute it to the states, right? And then our role can be either as a technical support partner or as someone who's bringing a lot of the evidence or as someone who's helping another nonprofit and collaborating with another nonprofit or government partner in that state to actually help them implement it, right? We don't need to do it everywhere.
And is Hindi speaking one of the filters? Like to say, we've done it in MP, which in Delhi, which are predominantly Hindi speaking. So northern India kind of makes sense to start with and then kind of.
Yeah, it's just, it's so tempting, yeah. Like when yes, absolutely, right? Like UP, Himachal, Chhattisgarh, so many natural, Haryana.
Jharkhand,
Right.
everything about
exactly.
Odisha, Maharashtra.
But then you're like, yeah, my mother is from Chennai. So I'm like, I know Tamil.
Yeah.
How tempting is it to go down south also, right? I identify with the culture. So, everything is an opportunity, right? And so you're just like, okay, well, maybe we should think about that too. This is Tamil Nadu.
No, and so for example, even for us, and I keep drawing parallel between education and shaving, which is weird, but given that's what you and I do, we did not think of South as a market because physically we're in Delhi.
Yeah.
Right? Physically we're here. We are predominantly a Hindi speaking team. So we will think about the Hindi speaking consumer first. Yeah. They're very different. So down south, even Plam from Pune, right? We don't do very well in Pune. We don't do super well in South because it's a mustache first set of states, right? So, but now I think we've hired a more local team. We're trying to figure out how to. Our Ashwin is our brand ambassador, the cricketer.
Yeah, I saw.
He's a Tamilian guy, right? So for him to so we're trying to figure out how do we kind of become. But it's hard. The same stuff doesn't work for us. So I'm assuming for you guys where it's teacher training, government schools, language and culture.
Yeah, so language and culture, right? I mean, so the thing is language. So culture, South India culture, it's much more comfortable to me, right? So I'm much more familiar with it. So it's not alien to me.
But culture of education and
culture of education, but there's a lot of English speaking there as well. But of course, Karnataka has Kannada. AP has it. So there is, of course, diversity, and you have to figure out, what is going to be your language of instruction and all of that. But the way of working with the government is pretty much the same in every single state, right? The SOP, the way that you kind of set up the governance system, the way that you actually co-design, the investment of time that you have to make in building that trust relationship, it's the same formula and same blueprint every single state, right? So that makes it a lot easier to replicate, right? Because you know what you have to do to be able to work with the state government. But then it's a question of, okay, then you kind of figure out, So there's a lot of work that we probably need to do just around what does the next level org structure look like for us, right? If we're going to go into other states, what does that mean in terms of decentralizing, setting up teams in other states, in the South versus a Chhattisgarh, for example, right? Both will be very different.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But I wanted to come down to actually a nuanced part of entrepreneurship that a lot of founders have spoken about, which is you started this alone, right? You obviously have gotten a great team, and you're someone who carries people along very clearly. Like you refuse to say I a lot. You say we even when you mean I. But and especially in a space like yours where sometimes government machineries are slower, headwinds are different in nature. Uh, have you ever felt like giving up?
I felt burnout, for sure. I felt burnout. And
Is it constant? Do you work on it, or were there one or two moments where it happened and you kind of gotten over it quickly?
so there's this, wonderful MD at DRK who's been an advisor. Her name is Lisa Jordan. And once I was sharing with her, I was like, Lisa, I'm just so burnt out. I'm, trying to figure out how to manage everything on my plate. And last year was a really busy one for us, right? I mean, it's like you're just constantly on that wheel, right? And you're constantly on that treadmill, and there's no stop button, right? It's constantly going on. And at some level, you're just like, you just get hit by it, right? And you do it just because of determination.
Force of will, no? Like,
Totally. Persistence and determination and willpower. Yeah, exactly. It's just, so Lisa said that, she was like, you need to identify it now and just work on it, because she said that she had this, previous boss of hers who one day called her and said, I'm calling in sick and I'm not going to come into work from tomorrow. She's like, Kruti, I don't want you to get there. So, imagine the burnout that person was feeling for them to actually get to that place where they just called in sick and they were like, we're not coming into work tomorrow. But yeah, so burnout is something that's real. I think what's also tough, right, is as a working mom, and again, I mean, this is true for everybody. I'm not saying it's only a woman problem, but there are so many things you have to juggle and multitask at the same time. So I have to make sure that Siddharth is getting support and help as he is growing. He's now 13, right? I need to make sure that he is getting the support he needs. I have to make sure that, the house is running smoothly and, things are sorted. And again, that's not necessarily easy to do, right? And I have to be a CEO who is doing all of the things that are needed as an entrepreneur, building a, rapidly growing organization, right? And there are so many things involved with that. There is partnerships, there is fundraising, there is program design, there is program impact, there is team motivation, hiring, functional strengthening. I mean, there's no end to how much you need to do, right? So then to be able to do those three things, add to it, on the personal front, you also have to have some time and space to actually also just have a personal space and life of your own, right? To get some downtime.
Right?
Yeah. And so, all of it together, it's hard enough to have to multitask all of this stuff as a CEO. But then when you overlay all of these other things, it is, you're always on, right? Like you just, and you had once told me, you had said this to me, I guess a couple of weeks ago. You said, I think you might be an empath. Yeah. And when you said that, I was like, yeah, actually, I might be. And then I was like, okay, as usual, let me Google, define how to start up, define empath. And the thing about being an empath, right, is that you feel a lot more of people around you, of energy, of feelings, right? So you combine all of this and then you overlay also being an empath. And just imagine the sensory overload and the brain processing that's needed. And that's what gets you burnt out, right? Because you're just always processing, right?
And I think you underplayed. I think I agree with you. We've had women founder CEOs on the show before, and I've been very conscious about not making it a conversation about women and making it a conversation about what they do and what they have founded and what they run, which has been the case here. We've spoken about what you do at People and what People does, and you've been very kind of categorical about saying, hey, this is not a working mom thing, it's a working parent thing. But I think it's a working mom thing because Sidhu's relationship with you is only with you, right? And there are things only moms can do, to be very honest, right? And then you're in a space where I think in some shape or form, you're taking responsibility for these 140 million kids, or at least the 10 million kids you directly touch, and the 130 million kids you don't touch and want to. And you're working in a system where dependence on government machinery is high, which itself I think comes with a certain amount of stress, biases. Most of the bureaucracy is male, right? So most of the political powers that be are male. I think it's very hard to run a non-profit organization in education as a woman founder who is a mom, also a solo founder. It's damn hard. So I totally feel you, man. Like I don't I sometimes feel that in the process of equalizing everything and saying men and women are equal, we trivialize the natural differences that exist, be it from domestic expectations, even at a relationship level, not at a role level, at a relationship level, right? So I think it's really hard to do what you do, but it's so important that there's no option but to do it.
So as a working mom, no, I actually think that women are very good at multitasking because they have to constantly multitask. Having said that, I think that, and again, I speak for myself, but as a working mom who's also a CEO, the guilt is constant, right? Because you have such, I don't know if it's, again, this is my own personal lived experience, right? But the guilt is constant because you constantly wonder, am I doing enough for my child, right? And again, I've had a very accomplished mother myself. Family members have also done extremely amazing things, right? So there's a lot of inspiration around me. So there's always been that bar to actually achieve and be, and do something with your life, right? But so that's just a constant, right? That's just ingrained in me, that there is no option but to work. I mean, that's the way I've been brought up, right? There is no option but to excel. There's no option but to, make something out of your life. When you combine that with being a mother, the guilt is constant, right? So you feel it all the time, right? Like,
You're right, because allocation is we were just talking with someone. CEO's top job is capital and time allocation. So if your time allocation thinking is about to work versus mother, there's no right answer. So I can only imagine it being like a constant.
Because also here you're responsible for another human being here, like directly responsible for another human being, right? And that person is counting on you. And Sidhu is a unique child. I mean, he calls himself Chief Cheerleading Officer of People, right? Like he actually in his signature signs off as CCO People, registered as Absolute Return for Kids, which is our entity name. And he, last time came to our offsite, he kind of managed to squirm his way into our offsite. He knows everybody, their titles, blah, 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 blah. He's a special kid, right? Like he is, deeply invested in my own career and in the organization, right? He feels that it is, he's equally invested in it, right? Yeah. But, the question is, to be honest, right? I mean, I'm trying to do all of this work, which, like you say, there is no option, like for me, right? It is incredibly important to do. But the question that I have in my mind is, when you make those trade-offs every hour or every day, you wonder, am I sacrificing my child's success and achieving his potential with the fact that I'm trying to do this for so many other kids? Because this is abstract, this is real. I see this every day, and I'm directly responsible for this child, right? I'm not directly responsible for all of these children, but yet I'm an enabler, and the organization is a catalyst for helping all of these children. So that's a question that is always, I mean, I don't know if it's ever going to go away unless I stop working completely.
I think once Sidhu grows up, right now is more formative. Maybe once he's
Maybe.
college or
Once he's a bit more
of an
independent.
adult. Yeah.
But, that's the thing, right? Like, you've got formative years right now. So then have you helped your child be the best they can be? But then at the same time, you can't spoon feed them. So you also have to let them be independent. I was pretty independent when I was 14 years old, right? My mother didn't have to tell me to study. I used to just study, right? So, but yeah, there's that. But then, so it just makes me value my time even more and ruthlessly prioritize, right? So I think of my time in installments of 15 to 30 minutes, right? Like, how have I spent? And then I do time audits regularly, right?
Isn't that stressful?
I have to do it because I have to feel like, first I have to feel like I am earning my salary, right? Like, I have to make sure that I'm adding value to the org, right? And if I'm not adding value, then why am I doing what I'm doing? Like, I have to, disruptively add value to the org. But so that's one thing. But then, so that's why it's important. But the second thing is I just have to, if I'm going to give so much into work, then I have to make sure that I'm meaningfully contributing to what I'm trying to do, right? Because, if I'm spending 10 hours at work, how have I spent those 10 hours, right? Have I spent it on the right things? I think also for me, a lot of energy, I think I just have to figure out what my sources of energy are going to be, right? For me, I'm very relationship focused, right? For me, people really matter, right? So for me, people are where I get my energy source. And I take it very, very to heart if somebody on the team is unhappy or if somebody's, feeling demotivated. Like, I feel like it's my responsibility to fix it.
The empath.
Yeah.
Also a responsible CEO.
Yeah, but it's a tough situation to be in, right? Because you can't make everybody happy. Yeah. But you try your best. But it's also very draining, right? Emotionally, time-wise, all of that. So you have to try and figure out, okay, what are the mechanisms you... So for me, right, as a CEO, I feel like I've changed so much as a leader in the last 18 months to where I was 18 months ago, right?
I'm going to ask you a question because it's just come off the top of my head. This is a conversation I had with Siddha. And she says, I think we should stop, I don't want to mother the organization a lot. I don't know, it's a strange thing to say, but I understood because you end up giving emotion. I think mothering an organization, I think the context in which she used it was as managers or leaders, do we end up becoming people, especially you who's actually a mom or women leaders, end up becoming mothers to their subordinates or to their teams or to their organizations? Do you think that happens to you?
No.
The people are kind of emotionally kind of sink themselves into you, or...
No, I'm very informal. So people are very surprised when they can just walk into my office or send me a WhatsApp message. I remember there was one associate on the team who did not come into my office for the longest time, and she would gradually peep in and then she would peep out. And I was like, Anna, like, do you want to talk to me? But anyway, so there was that. And then somebody once said, yeah, just WhatsApp Kruti, just check with her. And they were like, can we WhatsApp her? Can we WhatsApp the CEO? And then I was like, oh, I'm the CEO. So they're like, see, when you build something, right? I don't know.
You're bottom of the pyramid, yeah. Absolutely.
I don't know if I really lived the fact that I was actually top of the pyramid or the CEO, right? I was like, that's me. Right? But then I think what people probably like is the fact that, they don't think that they're talking to the CEO when they talk to me, or they don't think that they're talking to a CEO when they talk to me. And that's the way I want it to be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the way I would want it to be. I feel like everybody has incredible potential. I mean, somebody on the team who's working as an associate today could be a CEO of, an organization 5 years later, right? And it's a question of, and that's what's important to me, because I get energy from everywhere, right? So unless I have that dynamic, which is a conversation and not a hierarchy, I don't get energy from that relationship, right? And I usually don't have a filter, right? So I'll just say what's on my mind. And I think it's perfectly fine to say that because I'm comfortable with who I am and I'm not necessarily looking for approval or validation from anyone, right? So I'm like, yeah, okay, this is what I think. Okay, maybe I'm stupid. So one part of it is I haven't internalized the fact that I'm a CEO, right? So
It's a good thing.
could be, right? But the flip side of that is that sometimes things you say can be misinterpreted or taken a certain way, and you would never have thought that they would have been taken like that, right? So I think one learning that I've had is I actually have to weigh my words more carefully than I thought I did. So that's one of the downsides where
Of being a CEO.
yeah, you can't you do have to have some filter,
Yeah, no,
right?
no, because that's the thing, no? And Toshan said this beautifully, that with CEOs, a whisper becomes a scream,
Absolutely.
right? So some small amount, पता नहीं यार, run में कितना है company के पास, तो मैंने कहा cash पड़ा है. It could be just amusing. Oh my goodness.
है ना?
Heard outside.
It's not just me then.
No, not at all. It, for you, Sidhu still might be a 3-4-year-old because you've seen him grow up. He's 13 now, but for you, he's still a child. Similar thing with companies. You still think it's a startup or a young company, but it's got its own politics.
Yeah.
It's got its own, you know, corridor, coffee cooler, whatever, water cooler conversations. It's got its own everything. And you can swing things from
Totally.
a spirit standpoint with just a few small things. So you're measuring what you say or even how you behave is so important.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that I'm struggling with a little, not struggling with, but that's the equilibrium that I'm still trying to get to because, I think what I like about myself as a leader, right, is the fact that I'm approachable, is the fact that I can be honest, is the fact that when I talk to someone, I'm very authentic, right? I'm
How do
actually
you
very
preserve
sincere.
that at the same time?
Yeah, how do you keep that? Because I don't want to change the essence of who I am, right? Because who I am is what has brought me here, right? And so, doing stuff like asking someone to be on my board or, being fearless in another ask, right? If I had a filter, I probably wouldn't have done that, right? If I was watching what I would say, I probably wouldn't have done that. I mean, in some conversations, I use humor as a way of just breaking the ice and breaking stress, right? Because I just think that sometimes we just take ourselves too seriously, right?
Surely.
Like,
If it's about 40 million kids.
yeah, exactly, right? Like, well, hey, but at some point you're like, okay, at the end of the day, like we're all human, right? We're all people, and I am, for me, you are Shantanu, right? You're also the CEO of Bombay Shaving Company, but when I talk to you, you're a human, you're a friend, you're someone that I will relate to on a personal level because we're having a conversation and I'm looking you in the eye and I'm talking to you, right?
And it should end there.
Right. And so but then so there's that which you want to preserve, right? Because I think that is what defines me. And I want to see more of that in the world, right? I feel like a lot of us or a lot of people have become very transactional because there are boundaries and guardrails around how you should be and how you should work. And a lot of what you and I are talking about right now is feeding that beast, right? It's actually saying, no, we should actually not hug. We should actually not be warm. We should actually be careful about what we're saying because that is the way that things are. But then I think about myself and I'm like, no, why should we not change things? Why should we continue to have them the way they are? Right? Yeah. Because, every moment is an opportunity to change a mindset. Every moment is an opportunity to do something that makes the world a better place. So you have to have like some, you need to have some filter. Yeah, exactly. But then, it's a tough one, right? It's a tough balance.
I know, Kruti, I think we've had founders who are women who come on and kind of, for some, it's always about being a woman is so hard. And I get it. Raising money is hard. You're discounted. There are VCs who asked, what did you get pregnant? Crap like that, right? And it really fuels the fire in them to prove, but also kind of makes it 2 times harder. And as you know, as we went into this break, I was thinking, you are the other end where you kind of say, hey, gender, at least you try to put, this conversation has not been about gender at all. It's been about entrepreneurship and building people. But I'm fairly certain, everything else being the same, Sidhu being 13, running a 150 people organization that is people, two states, going more, all the board members raising money. But a male parent or a father doing that would have been like 2x easier, and you've had a much harder time. Uh, but you also seem to not want to acknowledge it publicly. Or I don't know whether you're maybe an optimistic person or someone who wants to take it in your stride a little bit and say, if I talk about that, like there's nothing much I can change, right? So what do you like? What's your view on that?
So I think probably because women are able to do it and not show the stress, right? At least I don't show the stress, right?
But inside must be there.
Inside it's killing. Inside it is killing you, right? Because you're just like, dude, this is like a pressure cooker situation and I cannot blow up because there are too many people dependent on me, including my son. And I cannot show that side of me almost blowing up. Or at least I think the way that maybe I've been brought up, you just keep a lot to yourself and you show that tough exterior, or you just show the strength and you say, yeah, I can manage, right? And then you build that muscle over a period of time. So you can manage, but it is a lot to manage, right? So, but I think so what happens is that because women are able to manage on multiple different tasks and they are not showing the stress, then people assume that they can manage and that it's not stressful, whereas it actually is.
I've seen so many people glorify this superwoman thing.
Yeah.
My wife is a superwoman. She's a great mom. She does this job, and when I come back home, she's there to do this. And I personally, for a while, I thought it was, great that you're acknowledging that she's playing. But over a period of time, I think I started realizing that it's a very manipulative thing to do. Is to praise someone when they're doing something extraordinary, just so that they can keep doing it, so that you can be a lazy ass. And it's not cool at all.
Yeah.
It's not cool at all. So I think glorifying the superwoman is, yeah.
I don't think I even heard that I was a superwoman, right? That's the problem. Part of the problem also, right? Because if you get appreciation for what you've done, then that itself is, okay, fine. Somebody is recognizing the fact that I'm putting in so much hard work, right? When you don't get the appreciation, then you just feel taken for granted, right? You just feel like, और कितना करूँगी यार, और इतना हो गया, like, और कितना push करोगे, like, how much more am I going to be able to do? But then also, see, there's all of that. And then as women leaders, there is also that part of us which, I don't know, I feel it a lot, but I feel like I've heard a lot of young women come up to me and say, we think that what you're doing is amazing. That, we think you're absolutely wonderful. We heard you on this interview and that's the reason we want to join Peepul, right? And so you just feel this sense of you need to also motivate and inspire, and you need to role model, which again is a huge responsibility. I don't know if men feel it because maybe there aren't enough male role models, or maybe there are too many, or there aren't, so the number of women leaders, for example, in the non-profit space, they're probably more male leaders, right? And so I'm also working in a space where in the social impact space, I'm a woman CEO. And so as you're an early stage woman looking to establish a successful professional career, you'll also look up to someone who's achieved that CEO position, right? You'll be like, I want to learn from Kruti. So that's another layer of responsibility, right? Because I'm like, I feel like I have to, also live up to that expectation that I have. And I also have to be there to mentor and coach, younger women, so that I have them believe that anything is possible and that they can be CEOs, right? And that there is no bar.
On that note, Kruti, I think this has been deeply rewarding. I think not non-profiting through Sakshi, of course, I've kind of vicariously lived the life of someone at the Gates Foundation through her work, but never really directly, right? And now, being friends with you for so many years, seeing what you have built through Peepul has been another eye-opening experience. But today was a very special conversation because we went deeper into elements of entrepreneurship in your space, in the social development impact space, which I would not have ordinarily done with you over a meal or when we meet casually. So it's been eye-opening, I think, for our viewers also. I think this generation is deeply, I think, cares a lot more about social impact than ours did on average. I think they care more, they're more aware. You see them kind of aspire for roles in those kind of organizations. So I think what you're doing for students and teachers, we also do for people who want to study development and build careers there. But most of all, I think I wish you and the entire family at Peepul, Sidhu, and everyone at home, the best, and huge, huge kudos for doing the work that you do. It's deeply inspiring, and thank you for sparing an afternoon and coming and talking to us here in the barbershop.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. It's just actually good to talk about a bunch of these things and go deep on them.
I do think that we should do a 2.0 where we go deeper on specific aspects of being a woman in this space and the challenges it brings and what one can do to kind of break out more. But thank you so much. We do have a gift for you though.
Oh. Hamper. Oh, wonderful. I finally get the BSc hamper.
This is the Bombay hamper.
Do I have to take it?
Yes, you have to take it.